Now take a look at this story. Pam Golding Properties finds itself in hot water for possibly aiding money laundering. The Estate Agency Affairs Board is investigating the company's conduct following a damning report in the Mail and Guardian. The newspaper claiming the companies facilitated the sale of 2 Johannesburg properties linked to politically exposed people. The properties, worth a combined 50 million rand, allegedly belong to the children of former Mozambican President Gabuza. Let's discuss this further. We're joined by the Estate Agency Affairs Board CEO, Mamudupi Mohlala. Good evening, and thank you so much for your time tonight.
Good evening, Kathy.
Firstly, let's talk about how you got wind of this particular case.
Well, obviously, we picked up from the media because there was the expose in the media that there is this kind of transgression that has been undertaken, and then we obviously felt that in terms of the laws and the principles that govern our conduct of our licensees as a regulator, we needed to investigate this matter further. But over and above that, we then proceeded to engage with the Financial Intelligence Center, because in terms of the act that governs them and in terms of which we are a supervising authority or a supervisory board, we then realized that any conduct in the property sector that aids or in any way facilitates money laundering needed to be looked into, hence our commencement of the investigation.
Do you think the fact that you weren't able to pick it up yourselves raises questions around the kind of controls that are in place, especially when it comes to being able to see what exactly it is those agencies that fall under you are getting up to?
Look, I think to a large extent, obviously, we do regulate to the extent that we can, and we obviously do investigations and inspections where we can. But I think it's also quite important that when we did pick up, or when the media brought it to our attention, we immediately dealt with the matter, and we are dealing with the matter. And I believe it's also important to note that we are not just dealing with it in terms of the Estate Agency Affairs Board Act, but we're dealing with it in terms of the Financial Intelligence Act. So we're looking at a combined approach in terms of which we believe then we'll be able to capture the practice in its entirety. And we're also mindful of the fact that this may be just one of many cases. So we are not going to just deal with this particular case that is in front of us. We would want to have a more comprehensive investigation.
Sure. And you know, it really brings us to the point of, if in fact it could potentially be as widespread as you may think it is, because you've talked about the possibility of having other politically exposed people using the same modus operandi effectively to buy properties in South Africa. How would you be able to tell if there are no clear checks and balances that would immediately flag an issue like that? Because clearly the estate agents would not want it to be known. So on their part, if they are guilty of such money laundering as has been alleged, theirs would be to hide it.
Yes, but obviously the law does empower us to actually go into the premises of an estate agent where we believe there may be such conduct. But over and above that, it allows us to summon documentation and to undertake an in-depth analysis in terms of that documentation. But over and above that, don't forget that estate agents are expected to report transactions that are undertaken by them on an annual basis. So we would be able to go back and to undertake an analysis of all the transactions that would have been undertaken for the past 12 months, and then obviously from that would be able to identify, depending on size, but most importantly depending on the source of the funding, because clearly the funding would, or the payments would have originated from a foreign source.
Do we know when these properties were bought?
Yes, I believe that it's part of the investigation. As I've said, we are at the early stages of the investigation, but we believe that information will be made available to us. And I do believe that we have already communicated with Pam Golding to indicate that the investigation is underway, but they will be obliged in terms of the law to reveal all the information that we think is quite critical and important.
Sure. Of course, on the back, on this particular issue, the EAAB finds itself in a bit of a back foot, because you're looking at an industry that to a large extent, at least when it comes to regulating and enforcing some of the rules, you're seen as a dog with very little bite. Even when you look at the kind of measures that can be taken against Pam Golding, should they be found guilty of this post-disciplinary hearing, would you want them to be prosecuted under the Financial Intelligence Act?
Yes, we definitely would. But I just want to correct one issue. Yes, historically we may have had limited powers, but our Act has recently been amended by the President. We had the Property Practitioners Act that was promulgated into law in October last year. And I think it gives us a lot of bite going forward. But in terms of the FIC Act as it stands, we do have a lot of enforcement power, because if after a disciplinary hearing, it is found that a person or an entity has transgressed the law, it specifies that you can impose a fine of up to 10 million if it's a natural person and up to 50 million if it's a juristic person. And one would obviously have to go into an interpretation as to that penalty, would it be per transaction or for the entire transgression. So I believe that gives us substantial teeth in order to be able to actually deal with consequences should there be such transgressions that are found.
Sure. Without triggering then the FIC Act in particular, how wide would, how tough would the sanction that you're able to impose be? So effectively, what are you able to do?
But don't forget, in terms of the Estate Agency Affairs Board Act, as I indicated, these are our licensees, meaning that we give them the license to practice, giving them a Fidelity Fund certificate. And if we find that your conduct is so reprehensible that it is a breach or it's a contravention of a law, we do have the right to withdraw your Fidelity Fund certificate, which would mean your whole business grinds to a halt. And I think there can't be a worse sanction than that, because then you are not going to be able to practice as an estate agent. So
is that the kind of fine that would be looking an agency that is accused and potentially found guilty of money laundering?
Those are the options that are on the table. It obviously depends on the nature of the transgression, and obviously you'd have an independent panel that will make a determination as to the extent and the nature of the transgression and what consequences would then be imposed, and our board would then approve. But there is the monetary or the financial sanction that can be imposed, but then there's also the ultimate sanction, which is to withdraw your Fidelity Fund certificate and you don't practice.
How then do you